All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to our webinar, Cracking the Code, RFAs, NOFOs, and Federal Forms. My name is Kristen Crew from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. And before we begin, we're going to go over a few logistics, and then we can get started. During the webinar today, everyone will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. If you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question dialog box anytime throughout the session. We will be saving your questions for a facilitated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording and other information that you may need. You can also download the slides from today in the Handouts tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. This webinar has not been submitted for pre-approval of continuing education credits, but eligible attendees will receive a certificate of attendance for their personal record. To receive a certificate for this session, you must attend for the entire session and register and attend individually using your real name and unique email address. Certificates will be sent via email within 30 days of the webinar date. If you have questions or if you need assistance, please contact smallsystems@syr.edu. Now for a little bit about us, the EFCN. The Environmental Finance Center Network provides training and technical assistance to small water and wastewater systems across the United States. If your community needs help with system management, please use the request form, which I will be sharing shortly in the chat. I would like to quickly highlight the series. The next webinar in this series, Crafting Powerful Logic Models for Project Success, will take place on Thursday, November 14th. I'll be dropping the registration link in the chat for that shortly as well. The full series schedule is also available in the Handouts tab for you to download and for you to also register for other future webinars in the series. All right, and on that note, we can go ahead and get started. I am pleased to introduce our presenter for this series, Cynthia Naha. Cynthia is a senior associate at the Capacity Collaborative, and she is also a senior tribal climate resilience liaison at both the American Indian Higher Education Consortium and the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. Welcome, Cynthia, and I will go ahead and hand it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Kristen. I do appreciate that. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to show my camera for a little bit, and once we get started on the presentation, I will turn it off. But I figure it's always nice for when you can see the person that's providing the information to you, and so you kind of can put a face to the name. So, Kristen, can you see that?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and just wanted to chime in real quick and say hi. So let me go ahead and close that. So today we're going to be talking about cracking the code, navigating RFAs, NOFOs, and requests for and federal forms. I apologize for that. So as I go through this, again, if you have any questions, as she mentioned, drop it into that dialog box. So as she mentioned, my name is Cynthia Naha. I am an enrolled member of the Hopi tribe, which is located in northern Arizona. I'm also Tewa and from the Ihanktawan Dakota Oyate, and I come from you today from my traditional homelands of my Tewa people here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I have over 20 years of working in tribal government, specifically in environmental and natural resources management. I've worked with several tribes and pueblos located in Arizona, California, and now New Mexico. I see this is an old, I do apologize, this one's an old presentation, but I used to be a director with the Picaris Pueblo as well as the director for natural resources for the Santo Domingo Pueblo, which are both federally recognized tribes here in New Mexico. And as mentioned, I also work for AHEC and the Southwest CAS. So if you're located in the Southwest and you have any climate adaptation needs, especially if you are a tribal government, I will share my AHEC email with you, and definitely feel free to reach out to me, and I could do my due diligence to provide assistance to you for any climate adaptation needs you might have. If you're from a different region within the country, I can also help you reach out to the specific climate adaptation science center in your region and help you get information and resources needed from that region as well. So as mentioned, there's a lot of information that's going to be covered today. I'm not too certain as far as everybody's understanding of RFAs, NOFOs, and federal forms, or what your experience is as far as a grant writer. So this will be definitely a lot of basic information. I do understand that a lot of you are coming from small systems. So as small systems, from my experience of working in tribal utility, we've also, if you are a utility director or manager or oversaw a utility department, you also included solid waste in that. So one of the NOFOs, or not NOFOs, but the RFAs that we'll go over will be specific to the SWIFR grant, which is the Solid Waste Infrastructure Recycling Grant. So again, if you have questions, just pop it into the Q&A dialog box here and go to webinar. So let's go ahead and get started and move forward in talking about the types of grant opportunities and federal forms. And if you were a part of last week's webinar, we did discuss identifying funding needs and finding opportunities. And so oftentimes, in order for you to really determine which grant opportunity you're going to apply for, whether that's a RFA, whether it's a NOFO, maybe it could be a cooperative agreement, maybe you're doing Bureau of Indian Affairs 638 contracting, whatever it might be. It's really important to ensure that you have identified what your needs are from your community, whether it's tribal or non-tribal, and really pairing those needs to what opportunities might be available. So again, when we go into looking at what requests for applications are, and I will show you what a request for application is, as well as, looking at NOFOs and where to obtain them. But basically, they're two of one. They're really similar in nature. But here, as you can tell, request for application, it's a financial award that's awarded by the federal government, state, or local for a specific project of research. It informs researchers and other organizations that they present a proposal on how the funding could be used, which is really important. So when it comes to identifying whether you're going to apply for an RFA or a NOFO, it's really understanding what your needs are for your community, but how you plan to use those dollars in accordance to what that RFA says or what that NOFO says, and how you can begin to develop your project proposal based upon those needs and based upon those allowable costs that are written within these different federal funding opportunities. Okay, let's move forward. So now looking at what a NOFO is, it's basically very similar. It is a public document. It describes a funding opportunity, including the eligibility requirements, the application process, and review criteria, which is really important. I found that as a grant writer 20 years, it's really important to understand what criteria you, as the grant writer submitting your proposal, will be reviewed upon, and not just the reviewing, but the scoring that goes to each of those components that you are required to put into your proposal. Now, whether that's following the guidance for an RFA or whether that's following the guidance of a NOFO. So again, just really ensuring that you take the time to read through each of these funding opportunities so you know what you're responsible for as the grant writer. And maybe you're not just a grant writer, maybe you're also the project manager that's going to implement the funding once received to really complete the project you said you would do, or to complete the research you said you would do. So perhaps maybe next fiscal year you can move on to maybe phase 2 if it's a maybe 3 or 4 phase project, or maybe you're developing your plan this first phase, and then the next plan is going to look for those implementation dollars to put that project into play. So again, it's really important to understand what you are required to do and submit based upon these different funding opportunities. Basically, there's, like I mentioned earlier, there's really not too much of a difference between an RFA and a NOFO. An RFA is basically just a type of NOFO. They're both formal announcements that indicate to you as the tribe or the small systems that there's funding available for a specific project or goal. The formats and requirements might be different, but typically each of these, an RFA and a NOFO, will require you to include a budget, a purpose, as well as that evidence. And when we get further down the line, I know we mentioned, Kristen mentioned that the next webinar will be on the logic model, and then like after that, we'll be looking also at what you could do to strengthen your proposal with the right type of data, because data is very important for you to build your project proposal, so that way you have that evidence that shows the federal, state, or local government that you're applying for the funding to, that you know exactly what you're talking about and what you're seeking based upon the needs of your community to apply for this specific type of grant. Again, RFAs target a specific topic area, while NOFOs are more like program announcements with special considerations. And we'll kind of look at that, especially as we look at the Clean Water Indians Tribal Set-Aside Grant. Because I think that one definitely is considered to be like a program announcement with special considerations, because it's not the basic as an RFA would be or a NOFO would be. So again, just knowing that, request for applications, formal statements that solicits grant or cooperative applications in a well-defined scientific area to accomplish that specific goal. So again, going back to identifying what your needs are for your community, ensuring that you have the ability to develop your proposal to fit those needs, but most importantly, to give yourself adequate time to be able to do it, to understand that most RFAs and NOFOs are basically 1 year. Some of them will be 2 years, where you got to actually develop a 2-year work plan instead of a 1-year work plan, and not just a 1 year or 2 year work plan, but you also have to develop a budget and budget narrative that is definitely in line with what your project is proposing, and not just the cost, but the time frame as well. And session 6, which I believe might be the last session in this webinar series, will be on developing a budget and a budget narrative. So looking at what does an RFA looks like. So as I mentioned, this comes from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. It is the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling Grant, and this one specifically for tribes and intertribal consortia. Most of them, when they do come out, they will look like this. So it will provide you the information in regards to the funding opportunity, because we will discuss grants.gov a little bit further down in this webinar. But most importantly, and I think what really, as a grant writer, that I've always, of course, every grant writer should keep in mind, is the closing date. When is the due date of your RFA? When is the due date of your NOFO? When is the due date of any grant funding opportunity that you are applying for? And it's important to keep that due date in mind, because of the fact that if you are coming from a tribal community, a tribal government, you're a staff member, say, getting ready to submit your RFA to whatever federal funding agency it might be. But before you do that, you have to get your signatures from your leadership. And this is probably true even if you're applying for EPA funding as a local government or as a state agency that is eligible for funding through the federal government, that you're going to need to get the leadership or whoever sits at the high enough office within your department signature. So you always want to give yourself time so they can always have an opportunity to review it. If there's any changes that might need to be made, you're given an opportunity to have that time to go back and make those changes. So again, this is just giving you an example of what an RFA is. In understanding, and I always find it really helpful for me to really read through the table of contents, review it, and most of the times when I'm developing my grant proposal, I often always go back to what the RFA says, because it's very important to understand, what your scope of work is, what are your project goals, what are you hoping to accomplish with this funding that you're going to receive or hopefully receive from this federal announcement, and how does it fit in with what you've identified as your needs for your community or your tribe? How does that need fit in with the RFA requirements? And does it fit in with those requirements? And if it doesn't, does that mean you need to go back to the drawing table to figure out what you might need to maybe modify as far as those needs are. And if it doesn't fit specifically, then again, also understanding that perhaps this RFA specifically isn't what your community needs. It's very important to know what the available amount of funding you can apply for. What is that ceiling amount and what is that low level amount you can apply for? Maybe the grant comes out and then it's awarding $250,000 to each community above a certain population, but you don't need quite that $250,000, even though you should always apply for the ceiling amount, but maybe you only need like 150,000 and you're able to do your project with that amount of money. So just always keep in mind that the amount available for funding is what you're going to need to understand as you're developing your project proposal and as it fits in with your needs as well as these requirements. Again, always making sure that you as a tribe or a tribal interconsortia or you as a non-tribal entity is eligible to apply for the grant, because you don't want to put a lot of effort into your project proposal only to come to find out later, oh, well, we weren't really eligible for this specific RFA, but maybe there's another RFA out there in the world of funding opportunities where you are eligible to apply for it. Page limit is always important. Now that I don't write as much grant proposals as I used to, I am now on the opposite spectrum where I am a reviewer of grants. So as a real reviewer of grants, of course, based off of that review criteria that, you know, I will show you towards the end of this presentation, it's very important to keep that page limit in mind, because many times if you don't keep that page limit in mind, you'll be like, oh, well, my project extended or my proposal extended half a page over the limit, you're not going to get your proposal reviewed. 10 to 1, the reviewers are okay. They did not follow the guidelines. They did not follow the requirements. They are over the page limit, so we won't even consider reviewing this proposal here. So again, keeping that in mind is very important, as well as the deadline date for submission. And I did mention this in the last presentation, that if you have to go to tribal council, who knows, your protocol for your tribe or your community, depending on what you're coming from, might have to have a resolution for you to even apply for the grant, because it's just a part of your protocol as far as what your governmental entity has set into place. So again, being mindful of that deadline date is very important in case you have to have a specific committee review it, in case you have to present it to tribal council. So again, it's always important to keep those types of things in mind. And like I said, for me, it's always very beneficial to read the whole RFA. So here again, just kind of showing you what some table of contents or the table of contents looks like for the SWIFR grant. You know, I think some of the main things is really looking at, you know, not just the scope of work, because the scope of work is going to let you know what you need to put into your project proposal, but also when it has things like national recycling strategy plan linkage, how is your proposal going to link to the strategy? How are you as your tribal or non-tribal community going to help reach whatever maybe requirements that the national strategy has or a national strategy has, and how you're contributing to that percentage or to whatever that national goal might be, and how can you get your community to get to that point. It's always important, and we will go through outputs and outcomes in the logic model discussion next week. The other thing is really looking at here, you see what is the available amount of funding, how many agreements will EPA award for this competition, and I think that's very important to understand, especially when it's competitive, because that means that you're applying for, you're one of maybe, who knows, 100 communities that are applying for this specific RFA, but they're only going to award 5. So because they're only going to award 5 and there's like so many people that are going to apply for it nationally, that, so to speak, for me, it tells me I need to ensure that not only am I on point with my project proposal, not only is my budget up to par and really is detailed and defined for what I need to meet my funding opportunity or to meet the funding opportunity needs and my needs, but it's important to understand that you need to create a project proposal that's going to be award winning. And I know, oftentimes it can be cumbersome and really trying to understand what that means. But again, just making sure that you're following the guidance is what's really important. So here, again, looking at when I was the director of natural resources for Santo Domingo Pueblo, I was the environmental specialist at the time, but I helped build our recycling program. So I was able to purchase that recycling trailer with US EPA dollars because we were trying to improve our recycling capability. And this was, of course, outside the scope of work of a Swiffer grant. But this kind of just gives you an example of what your scope of work should look like or what you should focus on based upon what the RFA requirements are. Again, just showing you another section where it tells you where eligible applicants are, matching funds, and that's very important to understand if matching funds are required. Going into just, requirements to submit through grants.gov, and we'll get to that here later in the end of the presentation. But again, just showing you what the table of contents looks like. Here I'm just showing you a section of the RFA in which it talks about those eligible applicants, knowing that the only people eligible for this specific RFA is federally recognized tribes or intertribal consortiums. So that really goes a long way. And then of course it always has these different links because this one was specific to tribes and intertribal consortiums, but they also had another Swiffer grant that's available for states and territories. So it just kind of shows you again that each federal agency with their funding opportunities is going to have different requirements or eligible applicants for different types of communities. Here going into what a notice of funding opportunity is. Again, it's very similar to an RFA. Again, you got to have certain requirements that are in there to follow. But again, it's just a formal announcement inviting grant award applications from, extramural investigators, so you and your tribal community, and I realize I forgot it right there. I do apologize. But again, just allowing for different communities or investigators, because you as your community, your staff writer, your grant writer or staff employee, you're the one that's going to be taking the time to develop your grant proposal, but not just the grant proposal, but especially if you've been in your position for quite some time, you are gaining that thorough understanding of the needs of the community you work for. And I can't express that how important that is to understand what these needs are, not only to build your capacity, say for training, but to build the capacity for the tribe to be able to maybe perhaps run and operate their own solid waste system or solid waste management system. But being that we're all small systems and we come from utilities, again, that's also very important to understand because you are the one that's in charge of your small system, and not just the system itself, but ensuring that you provide that safe and clean drinking water to your community, or that you are doing your due diligence, ensuring that you have a wastewater collection system that is appropriate for the amount of people you have within your community or the population you serve. So here's just kind of going into what the Clean Water Indian Set-Aside Program is. This one is specific to small and rural wastewater systems. And of course, there's also a non-Indian set-aside program where I believe you apply through the state. So this is one I just kind of wanted to show through and go through to give you an idea as to what another opportunity outside the Swiffer grant is. And the Clean Water Indian Set-Aside Program is a bit more cumbersome given the fact that you do have to work with the Indian Health Service. So here it just kind of gives you a breakdown of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding for tribal water infrastructure from 2022 to 2026, and seeing where and how the increases have come throughout these past 4 years, 5 years under the Biden administration. And one thing I think that's very important, especially as a small systems manager or operator, is it's important to understand these different types of appropriations that come from Congress, because what might be appropriated in one administration may not be the same that's appropriated in the next administration. And for me, being a tribal woman working in tribal government, or formerly working in tribal government, this was always very important for us to understand, because we knew that as each administration changed, either we would have less dollars allocated or appropriated to various needs like you see here in this graph, or maybe we have an administration that's appropriating through Congress more funding to really be able to support what our needs are and to not just help us build capacity for our community, but also to ensure that we are creating a safe environment. You know, we are having the appropriate technology to manage our wastewater treatment systems. We're having the appropriate money given to us to manage that drinking water system. So again, I thought this was just very important for you to see, so you can see how funding can be appropriated by Congress in any given administration or as the fiscal years come and go. So again, moving on and through the Clean Water Indian Set-Aside Program, I thought this was very important as I was reading through the memorandum that came out for 2024, is that, you know, EPA regions are expected to advise the local IHS, that's Indian Health Service Area Office, on tribes on project selections. So we'll go into a little bit about the SDS, which is the Sanitation Deficiency System. But for tribes, if you are working specifically with the tribe or tribal government for their small systems, it's very important to understand how the Indian Health Service plays a role in any type of funding request because of that sanitation deficiency system. So as we move through it, we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about it and kind of give you a better understanding of what this all means. So I like to show, or I've been showing this dashboard here that you see, the Division of Sanitation Facilities Construction. I showed it in the last webinar because I felt it was very important, because as you look through it and you see the project name, so we know this is Standing Rock, you know, it's their wastewater treatment. There was assigned a project number. The Indian Health Service area is the Great Plains, which of course is South Dakota. You know, and the funding mechanism is IHS Direct Service, but then it shows you the funding sources. And I thought it was very important to show in the last presentation the funding sources, because it can give you an idea as far as if you're working with the tribe or in tribal government and you're managing their system, it shows you what other tribes have applied for as far as funding to manage their system. Now this one of course has bill, but it also has tribal dollars allocated to it. So if you are a tribe that has maybe a casino or other types of economic development where you're able to put back into your system, that's really going to go a long way, because you're able to actually help build that capacity internally through your own endeavors, which gives you more, if you will, flexibility to be able to use that tribal funds in various different ways that might not be as restricted as federal dollars. Because again, when you read through the NOFO or you read through the RFA, you're going to see both what's allowable and non-allowable as far as those costs are concerned. And then if you look down here at Cheyenne River Sioux and what they're doing, and looking at the funding sources here, of course they have bill, but they also have the EPA Clean Water Set Aside. So I just wanted to take some time to kind of show you. And within the presentation, and I know they were sent to you via PDF, and I'm not certain if when you look at the presentations in a PDF format, if the links will be workable, but you can always just maybe copy and paste it into your server, and it should take you directly to the page where you yourself can look at the various types of projects that are happening throughout Indian country within, you know, the United States, and just seeing, you know, of course, if your project's on there, and looking at what it is that you need to have a better understanding on as you move forward, or as you continue to develop your project proposals to receive funding. Here's just some additional information that I did pull from the Clean Water Indian Set Aside, where again, you want to make sure that you have the information necessary to ensure that you are following the guidance and you are meeting the requirements of this grant program. So again, making sure you have your program name, your IHS area number, your IHS SDS number, and that priority number for the sanitation deficiency system. That is definitely really important, because again, my understanding of the SDS is every tribal's program is, or every tribe's project need as far as wastewater and drinking water, including solid waste, it is based off of a priority number and what sits at number 1 versus say number 10. So again, that's very important. And then your project cost, making sure that you are very diligent in developing your project cost, because you don't want to later be like, oh, well, we forgot to include a certain section. Maybe you need some new equipment, and the grant allows for equipment purchases, maybe of only so much, maybe of $10,000, but whatever piece of equipment you might need fits within that requirement and you forgot to add it, you won't be able to just go in and add it. You're going to have to wait till the next time you're able to submit for another proposal. So again, just making sure you're very familiar with your community needs and what it is that you're seeking for as far as these funding opportunities. I think it's always good to look at the frequently asked questions about any type of NOFO or RFA, and also know that you can always reach out to your, whether it's IHS area office coordinator or the US EPA regional coordinator. You can always reach out to a certain point in time to these coordinators to ask questions. And it's also important to have a good working relationship with your counterparts at IHS and EPA, because they can really help you further your potential to build your capacity for your projects based off of your community needs, and ensuring that as each fiscal year comes and goes, that you're working towards perhaps a long-term goal. Maybe you have, for example, an integrated solid waste management plan, and you're trying to plan for a long-term goal of fully managing and operating your own transfer station, and ensuring that not only does your plan, your integrated solid waste management plan, call for upgrades of your transfer station, but it's also accounting for increase in population, increase in tribal members side, increase in maybe the number of visitors that visits your reservation because you're establishing a new casino, or you're building a golf course, or you're just providing additional opportunities to have an increase in visitors or population. So again, you always want to make sure that you're accounting for various things within your planning projects. Here's just kind of going over the Indian Health Services sanitation deficiency system, knowing that this inventory is very important to projects developed that addresses these deficiencies within the American Indian and Alaska Native communities. So this system in itself is very important to know and learn and understand. And it also helps. I've worked with the director of the utility department in Santo Domingo when I was a natural resources director on, better understanding what the SDS is, and not just the SDS in itself, but what that really means to that community over there, what that really means to the Pueblo, what that really means to a tribe when it comes to these sanitation deficiencies, and what we need to know to ensure that we are doing our due diligence to our community, to our tribal members, by putting in the necessary information that's going to help develop these projects, identify those deficiencies, and prioritize them. I think it's really important when it comes to that prioritization, especially within the SDS system, because you want to make sure that you are accounting for anything that is necessary for your community, especially if you're moving from septic systems to a wastewater treatment facility. Oh, and I do have the link at the bottom, so you could definitely, again, copy and paste it and put it into the web browser. So here's just kind of showing what I showed you, within the EPA Clean Water Indian Set-Aside Program. Again, making sure you have a project name, who is the community, who is the tribe, what are these existing deficiencies? Are you having to replace your lead and copper pipes throughout maybe a housing area because they're so old and they're no longer working, and then replacing them with the PVC pipes that they're requiring now? So again, just making sure that you understand what that existing deficiency is and explaining it as concise as you can. Again, you see down at the bottom again where it says cost, making sure you have a detailed cost estimate for any type of proposed facility you're going to have, any type of rehabilitation you're going to do. So just making sure you're able to provide that cost. It's always important, and I know you know, especially for tribal governments, we can't, you know, match federal funds with federal funds. But if you're able to find various opportunities where you're able to use, like, say, a BIA 638 contract to leverage the funding or to leverage that match that's required by this NOFO or the RFA, that then be sure to look into all of that, because I know I did see, I believe within the BIA climate change program, you can utilize those funds to leverage, and it'll come in a 638. Here in the state of New Mexico, we do have capital outlay funding, which could also be used to apply and leverage towards federal funding. So here again, just take a look at this sanitation deficiency system handbook. There's the link right there. It'll definitely give you the information you need as you move forward in determining if this is the right grant program you go through, if there's additional NOFOs that are similar to what they are offering through US EPA's Clean Water Indian Set-Aside program. Again, just being sure that you do review the various different types of funding opportunities that are out there. Here just kind of went into, you know, some information on the BIA's Tribal Climate Resiliency Annual Awards Program. This year, because of Bill, a lot of tribes have been very fortunate to not only apply for the TCRP program for planning opportunities within their communities, but also implementation. And implementation really goes a long way, because we can plan for days, but if there's no funding out there through a RFA or a NOFO that tells us that, you know, we can use this money for implementation, then it makes it a bit more cumbersome. So just to give you a quick example for some TCRP awards that have been awarded, and you could definitely go to the link that's posted there, and it'll show you from, I think, way back to 2011 what's been awarded throughout the nation as far as these different TCRP funds. But I kind of just pulled a few, 5 of them that I've seen this past year that are specific to water and wastewater, because it's very important to ensure that as we're building capacity to increase our small systems, that we're also looking at the resiliency of these small systems. We don't want to create a state-of-the-art wastewater treatment facility without considering climate change and what we are experiencing within our respective areas, and how a changing climate can impact the infrastructure and our small systems. And not only that, but what are the vulnerabilities to the infrastructure that you do have established already? And especially if it's an older system, then what needs to be done to, you know, plan for a more resilient future for your wastewater system by looking at the various opportunities or your various your vulnerabilities, if you will, and comparing those to what your needs are. So again, I just wanted to take some time to show this as well. I do see we're rounding at 12:40, and I want to make sure that I do save some time for answering questions. So again, matching funds, just make sure that you do identify whether or not matching funds are required or not. Sometimes they can be required at a very steep cost, at like 50% of your funds that you're seeking. So making sure that, you know, if you are going to apply for a NOFO or an RFA that does require matching funds, that you and your tribe or your community has those funds to match. And again, remember that there are or may be a few opportunities out there for you to help leverage, like I mentioned, the BIA TCRP. So 4 things to know as we move forward. Again, you're going to have to submit this through SAMS.gov. SAMS.gov is very important, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with SAMS.gov, but before you apply or think of applying for any type of federal fund, make sure that your tribal government, you know, government, your organization, your entity, whatever it may be that you're working for, that they are already have a SAMS.gov number, because it does take some time for you to be able to go in and apply for, you know, just register your system or register your community for this system for award management. And so, you know, you can't use SAMS.gov without, you know, having that information. And so just making sure again that you do have your organization and entity registered in SAMS.gov, because then that goes along with grants.gov. So there's a lot of these different governmental portals for submission of your grant, your RFA or your NOFO, but these are the two main ones that you really need to make sure that you are up to date on and that you have all your information submitted, because the later you go in to request to have approval to be an authorized organization representative, then the quicker and easier it's going to be for you to go in and upload all the information that's necessary for your application in that grants.gov, and especially going back because they work together, grants.gov and SAMS.gov. So again, it's important to know that, you know, when you make account and if you haven't used your account recently and you're going to go apply for another grant, just making sure that you're still active, because you have to update your password every 6 weeks. And I know that sounds very cumbersome, but it's very important to make sure that, you know, you are updating your new password so that way nobody is hacking into your account. So again, you need to know what your EIN is, your employer identification number, or your federal tax identification number. And again, making sure that you give yourself enough time if you don't have one established by going to irs.gov. You also need to have your DUNS number, you know, the Data Universal Numbering System. This is very important because this is what's given to your organization, your tribe, and what you're pretty much known as within this federal system. We went through an ordeal when we worked with Santo Domingo Pueblo where we had 4 different names and we had to choose one specific name specific to the community. So then that took us going to tribal council, getting the resolution passed, and then boom, submitting to the Data Universal Numbering Systems to SAMS.gov, to grants.gov, and making sure that they all lined up with the same number. So it's very important to make sure that you do understand that you have your DUNS number and that it's aligned with your SAMS.gov and your grants.gov. So again, this is how the federal government tracks you and the flow of the federal dollars to your community. Again, keeping in mind the application deadline, I think that's very important because, again, you're going to have to get signatures from any of your leadership or those that maybe it's the director of the whole department for your specific project. So you need to make sure that you have time to get those signatures and whatnot. So here's just a list of some of the very important federal forms that you need to make sure that go with your NOFO or your RFA. And once you've done, for me, I mean, I've been doing it for 20 years, 21 years. So once probably the first couple years after I've done it, then it becomes kind of like the norm within grant writing, because you know you're always going to be expected to complete, you know, the pre-award compliance, you know you're going to have to complete, oh, this one came out too big, I do apologize, the SF424A. And this one's going to have all that information where you see the organizational DUNS, there's the employee tax number, you know, so you see the different things that you got to put into here. The key contact forms, it's very important to ensure that you have your key contact forms and who's going to manage it, who's going to be the authorized representative, who the payee is, who's going to do the administration, that's usually your accounting department, and the project manager usually being yourself. Here's the SF424A, the budget information, where you're going to list the information as far as the grant program or function and activity. You know, if you have any unobligated funds. The catalog for federal domestic number is always important to have, and I always find with EPA grants that they're very cumbersome to find sometimes. So making sure you have the information necessary to fill out this form. So you're gonna, you know, the budget categories here are gonna be in line with your budget and budget narrative that you're going to develop. And again, we'll go over that in session 6. Here's just another one showing what the grant program, who the applicant, if you have state funding or other sources, how you're anticipating to spend the amount of money you got each quarter, and it should all add up to what you're proposing and what that ceiling amount for that award is. So you see your direct charges here and your indirect charges. Making sure you understand what your IDC is very important as well, because if it's a high IDC, 10-to-1, half your project funding might just go to IDC and you might just have barely enough for your direct charges. But we'll go over IDC and whatnot when it comes to session 6. So again, don't forget the deadline. I think it's always important, and I cannot express this enough. And I know depending on your community or where you work for, I've worked for, several different tribes, and some tribes had a lot of staff, some tribes didn't have enough staff. So if you're a smaller tribe and you wear multiple hats, oftentimes we can tend to get overwhelmed. And if you're like me, I'm a procrastinator, so sometimes I wait almost to the last minute before I get started, and then I'm rushing around trying to ensure I can get all the signatures required, or I've just had so much on my plate where it's the proposal in itself has got kind of pushed back, where I haven't had time to go and submit it to my leadership for approval. So again, I think it's always important to remember that deadline and to ensure that you're staying on track with that. Here, just real quick, going over what the review and selection process is, and especially when it comes to award administration information. When you are awarded, when you get those funds and you're ready to move forward to implement your project and get it up and running. So it's really important to understand like a lot of this stuff, because I've been doing it for 20 years, and like I said, the table of contents to me is really helpful because I always go back specifically rather than trying to remember which page it was on where I needed to look up use of funds, or where it was where I needed to look up what my reporting requirements are. I always just go back to the table of contents because it's easier to just peruse through there and go straight to the page. Just to give you an idea, here is the evaluation and criteria and the max that are awarded per criterion. So again, I think this is really helpful when it comes to project proposal development because of the fact that you yourself are seeing what the grant reviewers are gonna, so to speak, grade you on and award what points. And if you can get as close as to 100, and again, making sure that you just follow the RFA and the NOFO, you'll follow the allowable cost, you're following what those requirements are for your scope of work, you're providing that detailed budget, you're providing your timeline. All of that information is very important to building a strong proposal. And again, if you're not awarded, say in this fiscal year, it's really important to know that you can speak with that grant coordinator or the awardee or your IHS area coordinator, region coordinator, because EPA region coordinator, because they can give you the information necessary for you to understand why you didn't get awarded this year. And then that gives you the opportunity for next fiscal year, especially if some of these funding opportunities and these RFAs are reoccurring. So, each year they come out, and the time frame that each year that these NOFOs and RFAs come out, that you can improve upon what your last project proposal was, especially if it wasn't awarded. Okay, we're just about rounding out the end. So here's just kind of information on, award administration and information. When usually they will let you know when anticipated awards are going to be announced. If you have, once they're awarded, you'll go through a cooperative agreement between the tribe and the federal agency where, again, you're going to have to get signatures on both sides so you can go ahead and begin to implement that. It's important to understand your reporting requirements. Are they quarterly, biannually, or annually? And making sure that you're on time with your reporting requirements, because that all goes hand in hand with grant management. And for many NOFOs and RFAs, oftentimes they will ask are you being a recipient of X many grants? How is your project management? And not just project management on your department side or your staff side, but financial project management is also just as important. Is your accounting department doing those drawdowns on the basis that they're supposed to be doing it, whether it's quarterly or biannually? Are they making sure that drawdowns are happening so that way whoever's funding your NOFO or your RFA, that they're seeing that you as a tribe or community or small systems, that you're doing your due diligence in managing your grant and you're having appropriate grant administration. And I think the most important thing, what I've always appreciated in being awarded once I've gone through the tenuous task of developing my project proposal, getting the signatures, getting it through council, getting it uploaded into grants.gov, is having fun with your project and really making sure that you are monitoring your goals and your objectives. And again, we'll talk about that when it comes to the logic model next week. But again, just have fun, because it's important to have fun in doing the work that we do, and not just focusing or on the strenuous side of things, but really showing yourself that you have the ability to be a project manager, you have the ability to be a grant writer, and you're able to implement this opportunity for your community based off of your needs. With that, are there any questions? It is 12:51. I wanted to make sure I got to the end of the presentation before the end of the hour. Kristen, back to you.
Hi, Cynthia. Thank you so much for that wealth of knowledge. That was an amazing, insightful presentation. We don't have any questions yet, but if you do have any questions, go ahead and get them in now. I also wanted to check with you, Cynthia. I know last webinar you had shared your email. If anyone wanted to reach out to you, would you like me to send that in the chat for everyone?
Yeah, I can. If you want to do it, that's totally fine. If not, I can go ahead and do it myself. Because I did share both. Well, yeah, you're gonna have to, or can I do it here where it says entire audience? I think
Yes, you can send it to the entire audience in that chat, and they should be able to receive it.
So I'm gonna share two different emails with you all. One's gonna be my my AHEC email if you have any climate adaptation needs. The other one is going to be my email with collaborative capacity if you have any needs for what we talked about today. And if you're also going to be in the series or have been in the series, at any point in time, you can reach out to me here at this email address for any questions outside of today. Okay, just put in the second one.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. And we still don't have any questions, which is usually a good thing with presentations.
Really? I thought it was better to get questions. I was
I don't
kidding.
know, usually it means good coverage.
Right. And well, like I said, outside of this, again, it is a lot of information to cover, especially if you're new to grant writing. I know when I started doing grant writing in 2006, when I worked with the Intertribal Council of Arizona, at first it's kind of like, huh? Because there's so much information for you to learn. And I've always struggled with my budgets, especially when it comes to that IDC, because you have to include IDC into that overall amount that you're applying for. And depending on that percentage that your IDC is at, it will always fluctuate, and I always went back and forth, pulled out of travel, pulled out of training, put back here, put back there. Then boom, once it hit, say, $250,000 evenly, that's when I would always be like, whew, success. But it's definitely, it's a good thing to learn. I think grant writing, having it under your belt, will really go a long way for anybody that's wanting to learn it. And no matter what organization, entity, or government that you're with, you'll always hopefully have that opportunity to be able to do grant writing.
Yeah, and I could imagine that when you first get started with grant writing that you might experience some imposter syndrome and feelings of, am I capable of doing this? So
Definitely. I mean, I know I felt it, or like I mentioned, the deadline is always important, because I mean, I've had opportunities where, yeah, you miss the deadline and they won't, budge, and there it goes. So then, especially after you get signatures from your leadership and stuff like that, and if you fail to put it in, because I've had that happen, then it really creates this, and I don't want to say like a world of hurt, but it just pushes you back a bit, because of the fact that now you got to wait one whole year in order for you to reapply for that funding opportunity. So it's
we did
just,
have one question that just came in. In your opinion, what is the most underutilized grant in terms of conservation and education?
Well, EPA has quite a different grant opportunities for education and outreach. I think to me, there's several different Bureau of Indian Affairs opportunities that come out for youth, that come out for like invasive species management and stuff. And I know oftentimes I hear like when we'd be in conversations with BIA and uh, Southern Pueblo's agency, as you'd hear they'd have several different opportunities for people to apply for them, but nobody would apply for them as much as we should be applying for, because they are additional opportunities. Yeah, it might be like $10,000, and that's the other thing is like I oftentimes see where it comes to these low grant dollar amounts that are awarded, that oftentimes I think people don't apply for it, especially if it's like $5,000 or maybe $10,000, and you're like, okay, well, what's $5,000 or what's $10,000 going to do, and how is that really going to help me meet maybe my education and outreach goals? But at the same time, $5,000 can really go a long way, especially if it's a funding opportunity that will let you apply for swag. And I'm not the biggest person on swag, especially if it's a bunch of pencils or pens that have the company name on it, because oftentimes, especially working in solid waste management for about 20 years as well, we'd always find them in illegal dump sites. We'd always find certain things just tossed to the side and things like that. So I know certain federal agencies kind of become stricter on purchasing the swag, but to me, I think it's the ones that have the low dollar amount, or that aren't well known just yet. And I can't think of anyone off the top of my head at this point in time. But for me, I know oftentimes those low dollar amount kind of grant opportunities get pushed to the wayside because of the fact that, as an organization or as a tribe, trying to improve or increase your capacity or rehabilitate, a system, or maybe it's a drinking water well or something specific, or even doing floodplain restoration, and you're wanting to remove invasive species. But then also, as you're doing removal of invasive species, you're also going to want to regenerate that floodplain by bringing back in the native species. So those $10,000 grants, $5,000 grants, $15,000 grants could probably go a long way with helping you purchase that native vegetation that you might need to be able to put back into that floodplain or riparian area to help accomplish your goal. So to me, I think those funding opportunities that don't come with a high dollar amount are often kind of just like, I don't need that one. Well, one, two, it's also the time that it takes to write for that opportunity. And if you don't have the time and it's something that may not fit your need, then of course you're not going to apply for it. But again, I feel it's very important, especially coming from a tribal government side of things and working environmental natural resources for tribes, that it's very important to really consider these low dollar amount grants, and really to consider, especially if part of your overall goal or your overall need for your department is to educate your community, educate them on the importance of, say, conservation, educate them on the importance of reestablishing the riparian area, the importance of bringing back native vegetation. And I think these types of grants can really go a long way. And any opportunity that you feel is very important that could help fit your community, your tribe's needs, should always be considered. You should always consider applying for it. And then you'll see over the course of time, applying for these smaller dollar amount funding opportunities eventually will equate to a larger amount, and not just dollar amount, but those long-term goals and objectives that you're hoping to accomplish based off of your community needs. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cynthia. And we have a couple questions that came in regarding the uploading process. My question is, when you're uploading your documents, why does the grant portal keep telling us to re-upload the application request for all this documentation? Yet on our end, it tells us to keep uploading, and we end up sending in sections rather than one document.
Right. See, and that's my biggest frustration, and that's probably going to be an administrative question for either of these portals, whether it's grants.gov, well, most likely grants.gov. But and it's been a minute since I've actually uploaded anything into the portal in itself, but that's one of the most cumbersome things. And I think oftentimes with grants.gov, you have to, like, you click on it to upload it, but then you also got to save it and making sure you save it. But then you also got to click on another thing where it actually sends it to the system in itself where you get that check mark. So for me, there's a lot of frustration I feel when it comes to grants.gov, especially when you're running behind on time and you're trying to get it uploaded the day of before 11:59 Eastern time, that you tend to run into a lot of these issues. And what I've also learned and heard, especially through various EPA opportunities, is it's because sometimes so many people are on the system that sometimes it like blocks it, if you will. But again, you shouldn't really be experiencing, I mean, it should be easy enough where, you know, you could go in, you go into your PDF, click on your PDF, click upload and save, and then it uploads and it gives you the check mark. It should be as easy as that. And if not, you know, always reach out to that administration portal, whoever's overseeing the portal, because they're going to help you identify what the issue might be when it comes to submission on your end and help you move through it or transition through it, hopefully smoother than what you've been experiencing, so it gets uploaded within that timely manner. That is definitely a technical question. I am not the technical expert on the grants.gov side, but again, just making sure that if you have any issues, to be sure you contact the help desk as soon as possible. Again, I think that's why it's very important to be mindful of the deadline dates, just in case you have any issues with the portal.
Great, thank you so much, Cynthia. And that is all the questions that we have and also all the time that we have for today. So a huge thank you to Cynthia for sharing her expertise with us today. Following this webinar, each of you will receive a follow-up email with the slides from today, as well as a link to the recording of this webinar. We also ask that you please complete the webinar evaluation so you can let us know your thoughts on today's session. This helps us plan future webinars on topics that are important to you. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at future EFCN events.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Cynthia.